IVM.
How would you like to be rewarded for paying your credit card bills on time? Cred gives you the chance to be part of an exclusive club of highly trustworthy individuals where you get cashback and other rewards for being good. Now that's a great policy. So don't miss out. Just download Cred and be part of the club.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. As you are aware, the People's Republic of China has disclosed its latest population figures in the once in a decade census it conducts at the end of every decade. This time, the census was conducted in 2020 and the results came out this week. Broadly, the People's Republic of China's population grew and was about 1.412 billion in 2020. However, the number of new births fell for the fourth consecutive year. Let me remind you that this is even after China lifted its one-child policy in 2016. I am Suyash Desai, and to make sense of all this, I am joined by my colleague Manoj Kevalraman. Hi Manoj.
Hi Suyash.
Yeah. Let us first briefly start by discussing what was one-child policy and why it was lifted in 2016. Can you just quickly outline what was one-child policy and why it was needed then?
Yeah, so if you go back to looking at how the Communist Party, once it came to power in 1949, its sort of views on the population, what you will see is that there was an interesting debate that was going on, right? So at one point of time, from what we understand, Mao Zedong was in favor of people having more children and people having a bigger population because he saw a bigger population as an asset. And therefore, people were generally sort of encouraged. But at the other side, you also saw very quickly this concern about, the size of the population, the ability to feed the population, the ability to sort of develop, particularly when your population is exploding, and that sort of a challenge. And that sort of goes back somewhere historically, right? Sort of under the Qing dynasty, there was a population explosion, and that's something that played on people's minds also. Yet, if you look at it, and I'm doing a very broad brush stroke here, right? So you look at it that under Mao, what you saw was that between 1949 to about 1976, China's population grew from around 540 odd million to about 940. And even after that, till 1983, the population continued to grow and it reached about over 1 billion. So it's a steady expansion, nearly doubling of the population from, say, the formation of the People's Republic till 1983. And that's the first thing to sort of note, that there was a significant expansion in population. And there were policies with regard to family planning. So in the late 50s and early 60s also, Mao had spoken about family planning, particularly in areas where there is high population. But the policies weren't necessarily implemented with sort of intense strictness. That begins to change in the 70s. And in 78 is where you start to sort of see a real shift where you have a policy on family planning. The sort of one-child policy comes into being in 1979, where the government starts actively advocating that policy. And in the 80s onwards, they start to implement it far more strictly. That implementation process has been deeply controversial over the decades. The idea was that, look, if you contain the population, you sort of can contain the explosion on demand for, food, goods, services, whatever, and you can sort of ensure development. And again, this is not something that is new. If you are an Indian, similar currents of thought were existing in India, right? And even till today, they exist in India. When you suddenly see the argument about the fact that one of the problems that holds India back is the fact that we have such a large population. And that was sort of a similar thought that had developed at that point of time, that you want to have, each family should have one child and not more. There was sort of carrots and sticks approach to China in implementing this. The carrots were essentially incentivizing families not to have more than one children or penalizing them, which was the sticks concept, where you had penalties if you had more than one child. You had to pay fines. You had to register births, and there was an entire bureaucracy that was built around this. There was lots of forced action that was taken, forced abortion, and there was lots of these horror stories also that came out during that point of time. And this sort of continued throughout the 80s, 90s, the early 2000s. And towards the sort of 2000s, you start to hear this conversation about the fact that, well, you are entering a phase where increasingly the population will start to shrink and the population of the elderly will start to increase. Again, if you go back to the 70s, 80s, China's population, despite expanding, was a very young population. By the time we get to the 2000s, the population is beginning to age significantly. And you start to see this concern about an aging population having an impact on economic growth, and also the cost and the burden on the state to take care of this aging population. And that then requires you to create adequate social safety and social security nets, along with sort of the medical expenses, support for that, and all of those things. So you start to see that conversation take shape. There's a realization that, look, this one-child policy needs to go. People need to be encouraged to have more children. The challenge in that is that as the country is getting more prosperous, cost of living is increasing, marriages are being delayed because more people are working. And what you're starting to see is that you're starting to see people not interested in having children as much anymore. So by the time Xi Jinping comes to power, this sort of discussion has fairly solidified towards a final policy outcome. And in 2013 itself, there's an announcement that this is going to be changed. And the policy, initially there are sort of tweaks in the policy where you see this idea that in case of a couple where one parent was a single child, then that couple can have two children. So it's something like that where you start to loosen the policy a little bit to 2016 when it sort of got eventually abolished completely. And the idea was you promote couples having two children at least. So that's the shift that's happened. It's partly to do with economics. It's significantly to do with economics because the entire approach towards population has been from the point of view of factor of production and factors of consumption. So it's been from that point of view. It's been an economic approach as opposed to a human approach in any which way. Which, fair enough, from a government's point of view, you will think of that. But what came with it was a very ugly history of suppression, of violation of people's rights. And what we today have is the government trying to incentivize people to have more children because you are worried that your elderly population is rapidly rising, your working age population is shrinking, and that's going to be a strain on China's economy going down the road. And given its current status of development, the entire argument is that the fear is that you will see China growing old before it really grows rich.
Thanks, Manoj. That's a good backgrounder to talk about census. Before discussing the current census, the results of the current census, let me quickly highlight how it is conducted in China. This was the 7th national population census that China conducted in 2020. Over 15,000 people were involved in conducting census. There are two approaches for census. One is the village approach, one is the city approach. In towns and cities, the census are conducted by door-to-door basis, knocking door to door. This is similar to how it is conducted in India. But in villages, it is announced previously on loudspeakers and people are rewarded for their cooperation. So people have to go to the counting center. All this data, once these 15,000 people, once they collect the data, this time for the first time, they had to upload the data using WeChat. Maybe because of the pandemic or maybe because of administrative efficiency, WeChat was used this time. The recent census results indicate two things. First, China's birth rate has fallen since 2016. As Manoj, you have pointed out, 2016 was the scrapping of one-child policy. Last year's number was a 6-decade low. Previously, this year, about 14.6 million babies were born in China in 2019. This was the lowest since 1961, and 1961 was the year of a great leap forward, where people were starved to death and there was mass drought throughout China. So, considering all these facts in mind, what do you think are positives and negatives out of this census?
Yeah, I think let me just correct some data points first. Last year, the number of children born was not 14, it was 12 million births last year, which dropped from the year before, so in 2019, where it was 14.65 million. So there's an 18% drop in births from year to year, from 2019 to 2020. So that's the first thing, that there is a significant drop in birth rates, and that's going to be a problem. The other sort of key points, and there are lots of interesting sort of bits in the census if somebody wants to go through it. So they've done a division not just from the point of view of age-wise how it's happened, but also the gender ratio, the sex ratio, to the ethnic divide in China, to regional distribution, to in terms of what sort of population has university education, and so on and so forth. So it's interesting to understand through all of those how China is developing and what are the challenges that exist. So quickly, just looking at the age-wise population. So yeah, the first challenge is that you've got a marginal increase of 1.35% in terms of population between 0 to 14 years of age. So that's the first thing. So it's a very marginal increase from 2020 to 2020. And like you've pointed out, the trend started going negative since 2016 even further. And last year's data I've just shared with you. So the trend line is not necessarily positive in terms of new births. Another important data point to note in this is that the fertility rate for women in China is 1.3, which is which is around where Japan's rate is. So it's not good at all. If you're looking at replacement, for the replacement rate, it should be around 2.1. So they're nowhere close to that. And this data sort of bears that out in some ways. The other thing is that in terms of the elderly population, so that, according to this official data, went up significantly by 5.74% from 2010. So it went up to so the population over 60 years of age. And in that also, if you see, a very high number of people are above 65. So that's again a much older population, retired. So this tells you that you're going to have a greater burden in terms of social security on the state and a burden on the current working age population. The third and most important thing was the working age population. The working age population, which is 15 to 59, if one is to consider, has fallen down by 6.79% from 2010. So again, if you're not replacing enough, your working age population is shrinking. There's going to be a far greater burden on the state because you don't have enough people earning and paying into the pension system so that people who are older can be taken care of. So that sort of cycle is not virtuous at the moment. And what we understand is that over the next few years, and much earlier than what the government had predicted previously, so estimates are by 2027 or by 2030, you will now see population peaking. So that's again a challenge that's going to come by, which tells you again that this economic engine will face challenges. So that's the sort of broad issue with regard to the age-wise population. In terms of what the party has been thinking about this, there's lots of talk about, automation and, can you automate before you grow old so that it doesn't affect productivity? Those are again conversations that are ongoing. But at the end of the day, you will need manpower. So will China open up to immigrants even much, much more? And if it does open up, there are political consequences. So those are again things that we need to keep in mind going forward. The other sort of important thing with regard to this distribution of population is really, really interesting because in terms of regional distribution, what the survey tells us, or the census tells us, is that in Eastern China is home to around 40% of the country's population. Northeast China is home to about 7%, and Central China about 25%, and Western China around 27%. But apart from that, the data tells us that over since 2010 to 2020, the growth in population in Eastern China has been around 2.15%. The rest of them have been marginal shifts. And in fact, in Northeast region, the population has fallen down significantly. In the Western region, it's gone up very marginally by 0.2%. So what this tells you is that despite the effort to sort of have balanced growth between different regions, you're still not getting there because people are not migrating there. And people are not migrating there because, again, development opportunities they see in their perception are much more limited. So you go where there is prosperity and where you see that there is opportunity. And more people continue to migrate to Eastern China, which has been a prosperous region. So again, that idea of unbalanced, uneven growth that Xi Jinping talks about is reflected in these numbers. The third thing with regard to gender, again, the gender ratio remains fairly poor even today. It's around 105.07. So that's 100 women, and the ratio of men to women is around 105.07. Again, this remains a challenge because there is increasingly women are not wanting to get married early, women marry late, so you tend to not have children. Like I again said, cost of living is very high. People tend to have one child if they would want to at the most. So again, that challenge is reflected here. Also, the fact that if you have many, many more men, tens of millions of men who are of marriageable age and who are single, more research will tell you that there is a greater potential for social chaos, when you have such a situation. And that's again something that needs to be kept in mind. The final point is with regard to the ethnic divide and education. So again, the ethnic divide is still very, very stark. You still have about 91% of the population, which is Han ethnicity, or as the Chinese call it, nationality, and about 8.89% of all ethnic minorities in the country. So that's again an important point to keep in mind. The lack of that diversity, at least if you calculate it from this point of view. The one big plus in this is that you're seeing many more people who are now who have acquired university education. So the population with university education is estimated at about 218 million people. That's significantly higher compared to 2010. So in 2010, you had about 8,900 people from every 100,000 who had university education. That number is nearly double, just shy of doubling. It's around 15,467. So that's again important. The average years of education of population aged 15 and above increased from 9.08 to 9.91. So again, that's significant. And the illiteracy rate has dropped to 2.67%. So it tells you that increasingly there's a more educated working age population that exists today than there existed in 2010. So that's a positive because you will have more high quality talents, which is what the party wants. So that's a snapshot of what the survey tells us about the government's priorities and how government policies are working or not working.
Fair enough, Manoj. My final question to you is, since you have highlighted so many challenges out of this survey, what is the People's Republic of China doing to improve this situation? One, we already know that it has scrapped one-child policy. You also briefly mentioned about Xi Jinping's approach to equitable distribution, focusing on relocation to Western areas which are sparsely populated. So what is China doing for addressing these challenges?
I think there is a different set. So at one level, firstly, when you scrap the one-child policy and you gave this go-ahead in some ways to different governments, creating this imperative that look, different local governments around the country need to start to boost population because you need to do that. So you saw a set of different incentives being rolled out, by governments around the country. So, for example, I was reading some time back that you've seen, in Liaoning province, which is in northeast China, you've seen policies with regard to, providing tax reliefs, education support for children, greater social security, housing benefits, and subsidies for parents wanting to have a second child. Because essentially, you're looking at addressing cost of living challenges that parents may have. And again, this is not, China is not alone in doing this. Other countries have also tried doing this by incentivizing couples to have a second child. Some of the policies that we've seen in the past in other countries range from, providing things like paternity leave, making sure that women get paid and they get the adequate amount of relief that they need. They have adequate medical care as they need. Making sure that, in some countries you even get paid, you get benefits directly if you're having a second child. So there is financial incentives, there are support factors which are being provided, and that's the range of policies that different governments around the country have been trying to implement, because you essentially want to create a favorable environment for people to consider having a second child. The other challenge is that, and the challenge to all of this is that cost of living is just one aspect of this. The other is also about whether as people start getting married later and they have children later, again, you need fertility support and these kinds of things. And the government is saying that we will try and provide all of this to you. But as people get married much later, the incentive also from an age point of view and from a lifestyle point of view reduces to have a second child. If you're somebody who got married at 27, it is much easier for you to conceive of having 2 or more children. Or at 25, it's much easier for you to conceive of having 2 or more children because you feel that there's a longer time span for you to settle in and have children. But if you're somebody who's getting married at 33, 34, what you're going to see is that you're going to see yourself thinking of one child because even if you have the child immediately after marriage, the capacity, the energy that you need to have a career, to manage the child and to do the rest of the things that you need to do in your life, your time is sort of crunched. So your choice is more likely to be one child, even if there is incentives available financially outside. So I think that's another challenge the government faces. Although the approach right now has essentially been about providing different kinds of incentives, financial and support incentives. And that's what they've been largely trying to do. The other argument is, like I said, about automating before you go or before you grow old, so that you try to address this issue of population decline, and that you're not really doing well with this, which the numbers bear out. Then maybe the idea is, if you're looking at it from a productivity point of view, and from an broader sort of economic development point of view, then maybe the idea is automation could be the answer. So if the issue is labor shortage, automation can address that. Now, that's an interesting idea, but can you automate as quickly? Can automation replace labor in that sense, depending on where you are currently on the supply chain, sort of on the industrial value chain? I think those are interesting questions to which at the moment I don't think anybody has really any answers. But my guess would be that it's going to be very difficult to automate out of a shrinking population to create enough productivity which can ease the burden on your growing elderly population and the support you need to provide to them. So I think that's a real challenge that remains for the Chinese government in terms of how it manages it. Of course, another way to do this is, if you're addressing a labor challenge, is to open up your economy to immigrants. That, like I said, has political consequences anywhere in the world, not just in China. I mean, immigration is a huge issue in the United States, it's a huge issue in Europe, it's an issue in India. And in China, where, like we spoke about, ethnicity and identity, where it is in some ways, the diversity is very limited in that sense. Opening up to immigrants en masse might be quite difficult and will prove politically challenging. So I think that has to do with identity issues also. So again, if the government can do that, and if they can do that successfully, that might ease the pressure also. So there are ways around these challenges, but it depends on how the government goes about it going forward.
Thank you so much, Manoj. This was an insightful conversation. You gave an overview regarding the recently conducted census in the People's Republic of China and the challenges that the country faces. Listeners, if you like our China research, please do subscribe to Manoj's newsletter, Eye on China, and his People's Daily blog. Many thanks, Manoj, for joining us. And thank you so much for listening to All Things Policy.
Thanks so much, Suyash.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week: Cred, TheWholeTruthFoods.com, PayPal, and Seat Tires. We really do appreciate the support. So the last year's been tough for all of us, and the second wave of COVID really hit us badly. To help those affected by the pandemic in India, the podcasting community has come together under the Pod for Change banner to raise funds through an exclusive NGO partner, Give India. Join IVM and Pod for Change as we look to make a positive impact in the life of those affected by COVID-19. You can go to tinyurl.com/podforchangeindia, and remember, somebody could really use the help. And now back to the promo. On the Simplified podcast, the gang explains the oxygen crisis happening in the country and tells us the various measures being taken to tackle it. On States of Anarchy, Hamsani Hariharan talks about how the geopolitical relationships shaped COVID response and the world order. As Indians, we're all familiar with acid reflux or heartburn, given the spicy food we consume. On The Habit Coach, Ashton has some simple solutions to counter that. Osama Moria explores the iconic neighborhood of Dadar and tells us its connection to outer space in Postcards from Nowhere. It was Dangle time on The Fighting Goat, as hosts Somesh and Arjun were joined by unbeaten MMA fighter and Commonwealth gold medalist Ritu Fogart. The traveling professor Siddharth Deshmukh shares examples of various innovations that came up during the COVID times and helped us deal with the situation. And with that, we hope to see you again next week.
Do you know Tamil? Tamil புரியுமா? Do your children enjoy great stories that inculcate good values? Hi, I am Ravishankar Balachandran and I host the Storytime Tamil podcast. I am excited to share a short story with great moral values every day. Listen to Storytime Tamil on the IVM podcast app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts from.